Wasting money on cures. Forgot how to fix myself. They say that time is free. Then why is it so precious? Oh, I'll say memories in my head, like Polaroids on walls. They remind you to look ahead. Time is running out. Time is running out. Lately I've lost my track. I've sailed the deepest seas, hoping to find something to bring back better times. Oh, I'll say memories in my head, like Polaroids on walls. They remind you to look ahead. But time is running out. 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 Time is running. Time is running out. But time is running out. What if my best days are over? They can't be over. They can't be over now. Time is running out. What if my best days are over? They can't be over now. Time is running out. Time is running out. Time is running out.
Time has run out. Good evening, everybody. It is John here from Tutor to You, welcoming you along to the second in our short little series of revision blasts for AQA A-level geography. And tonight we're going to be concentrating on a place study focus. Good evening, of course, as well to Alice in the middle of the screen and Suzanne on the right-hand side. Good evening, both.
Hi. Hi, evening.
And of course, massive warm welcome to those of you who are joining us live. Just looking at my little clock down here, yeah, I've got loads of you waiting. And if you are joining us live, we've got lots of fast-paced activities for you tonight, and we would love to know your responses to those questions. And if you feel as if you do know the answer, do join in using the chat window on YouTube. We'd love to see that as we go along. If you're watching this on replay, of course, you can take a little bit more time and have a longer think about some of the questions. Now, in case you haven't seen one of these before, like I say, we've got about 35 to 40 minutes of fast-paced activities and revision blasts. And at the end of that, you'll be able to download the PowerPoint that we're using tonight. And this live stream is actually being recorded, so you could watch it all over again. Suzanne, can you tell us a little bit about what we're looking at tonight?
Yeah, okay. So really we're focusing on the place study focus. That's the kind of key thing that we're trying to cover today, because I think that's something that students struggle with, kind of how to actually talk about place and link some of those terms to their place studies, both their local place and their distant contrasting place. So we're going to be having a look. I think if we see the first slide,
yeah, we'll get on to that.
through some
we'll
of the...
yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, so yeah, it is an exciting session. So we're going to start off looking at the nature and importance of place, and we're going to be introducing some of those key geographical terms and some of the concepts that help you understand what the meaning of place is and how it's really fundamental to some of those place study focuses that we need to do. We're going to lead straight into a very early exam gold, where we're going to have a look at a practice question to try and sharpen some of your skills to prepare you, because we know a lot of you have got perhaps A-level mocks coming up, or you may have some end of unit tests soon. So it can be your chance here to have a good think and apply what you've learned. We're also going to be looking and talking about the place versus case study. I'm trying to explain to you what the difference is between them, because they often get mixed up. So in this segment of the Study Live, we'll have a sort of clarify what the difference is between the two, so you can make sure you use them in the correct place in the exam. Hopefully by now, you know you'll be conducting at least you will be conducting 2 place studies for changing places. So we'll take you through some of the things that you need to know about those studies, so you can really fully cover all of the key components of the specification. And we'll be giving you some great online links. So it may be some that you've looked at before, but hopefully we'll be able to give you some new ones to take a look at, to ensure that your place studies are really comprehensive with some really up-to-date data. And then finally, that leads us into looking at different types of data, and particularly an important one that all the place studies need to have is lived experience. So we'll be having a look at that kind of qualitative data that as geographers we use, and we'll be having a look at how rich and interesting some of that lived experience, or talking about how it can be really interesting to inform our understanding of places. So I think that kicks us into a bubble quiz. So off we go over to Alice.
Thank you, Suzanne. So hello to everyone. And if you've not joined us on one of these revision blasts before, just to let you know that the bubble quiz is a bit like a multiple choice quiz, except there could be 0 right answers, 2 right answers, 3 or 4 correct answers. So what we're hoping is that you'll join us by putting some comments in the chat, so we can see who's up to speed with place and place studies, by answering a few questions. Let's have the first one, John.
Alice, just before we move on to the first one, I should tell everybody who's watching tonight, we've got a little bit of a delay between our broadcast and what's coming out on YouTube Live. So forgive us if we don't see your answers immediately. It might take us a few seconds before we see them. Here we go.
Thank you. And of course, if you're watching on catch up, you can do things at your own pace, but do join in, perhaps grab a pen and pencil and jot some things down. So question 1, which of these are categories of place we need to know about at A level? Are they A, far, B, experienced, C, near, and D, media? Have a think. Which of these are categories of place we need to know about at A level? And put your answers in the chat. So you just be putting the letter or letters of the correct answers in the chat for us, so we can see how you are doing. What do you think? Oh, now I can see there's a few people having a go here. We do want you to take part, so give us an idea of what you think on this one. All right. John, do you want to reveal the correct answers? Ah, they're all right. They're all right. So these are 4 different categories of place we need to know about at A level, and they relate to our place studies, of course. So you need to know about a local place, which could be a near place, a distant and contrasting place, which could be far, both physically far, but also it might feel far in terms of your own experience and being very different. Your local place is clearly an experienced place, but it might be that you haven't been to your distant place that you are studying for your place study. And for you, it is just a media place, because you are just using what you find on the internet to inform your understanding of it and how it's changing. Thank you. Let's have a look at the second question. The views of local residents on a proposed change in a place differ from those of tourists. The views of local residents on a proposed change in a place differ from those of tourists? Which contrasting perspectives are being outlined here? So we're looking, I think, for two perspectives looking at that quote. Are they A, insider, B, outsider, C, exogenous, or D, endogenous? Which of those letters do you think are the correct answer? Or is there more than one answer to this one? I may have given you a hint there. Well done to those people who are contributing in the chat. I can see for the last question that Joshua and Sam were right on the money. And yep, we've got some good answers coming in for the second question then. John, which ones are the right ones? Yes, they are insider and outsider perspectives. So we got the views of local residents being the insiders, perhaps, and the outsiders being the day trippers, the tourists who perhaps don't understand the place in the same way as the local residents. They've got their own views about perhaps a proposed planning change. Question 3 then. Different scales of place may be linked to different forms of place attachment. Different scales of place may be linked to different forms of place attachment. Which of these fit this description? So we've got A, NIMBYism, B, localism, C, regionalism, and D, nationalism. Remembering the answer could be 0, 2, 3, or 4. So just going to give you a moment to have a look at that again. How many correct answers to this one? Or are there any correct answers? What do we think? Well done to those people typing away in the chat window. Okay, John, answers please. So 3 of them were correct. So localism, regionalism, and nationalism are all forms of place attachment linked to particular scales. Whereas NIMBYism, that's kind of a pejorative term. It's like a political put down, isn't it, for people who don't like change in their local area for their own reasons. I don't think we would necessarily see that as something that we are going to refer to in the same bracket as localism, regionalism, and nationalism. It's almost about patriotism, isn't it? And about love of your local place and where you live, where you've grown up. Okay, thank you. Right, we've got a different activity now, and this is called such as seasoning. So it's getting us to think about when we're writing about places or anything in geography, really, we need to describe in detail what we mean. So if we use some such as seasoning to complete a statement, then we are really explaining what we mean in a bit more detail. So when we think about place as a concept in geography, it has a number of different aspects, and one of those is location. So can you think about how we might finish this statement? Location is the specific position of a place, such as... How would you finish that? Can you get an idea down into the chat window there? What do you think? I can see Sam did well on the last question. Well done to you. Okay, let's shake some seasoning on that. Location is the specific position of a place. Wonderful sound effects there. Such as its latitude and longitude coordinates. So if we think about the coordinates which help it to help us to locate it in physical space or on a map, that's one way of finishing this statement. I think we've got one more of these activities, John. Okay, so we're thinking about this word endogenous factors. Can we shake some such as seasoning onto this then? Endogenous factors include a place's physical geography, such as, what do you think? And looking at the chat window, thinking about that last activity, well done. Dewsbury is located in West Yorkshire. And Joshua, you had the coordinates one, didn't you, on the last such as? Well done. Sorry about the lag, people. Right, let's have a look at the answer to this one. Endogenous factors include a place's physical geography, such as its geology, topography, so the shape of the land, the relief of the land, or soil type. So these are all factors that start to come together to and combine to give us the character of a place. And I think Suzanne's going to explain this in a bit more detail for us now. Oh, no, a little bit later. She's got one more activity for us. Sorry, Suzanne, jumping ahead.
That's all right. Yeah, we're going to do a true and false, which is, I love true and falses. Right. So all you need to do is just put a T or an F into the chat box, and hopefully I'll get to see it before we go through the answers, but it is a little bit laggy tonight. So is it true or is it false? The study of a place as a subjective experiential concept was championed by Yi-Fu Tuan. Do you think that's true or do you think that's false? So pop it into the chat box. And hopefully they're going to come through any minute, hopefully. Barrage of them, I would expect. Yay! Well done, Sam. First off there. So let's have a look. It is indeed, they're true. Yes. So he's actually known for the application of a humanistic perspective to geography, and he really emphasized the importance of understanding lived experience, looking at perceptions and meaning that individuals and communities actually attach to place. So he really kind of pushed the boundaries of geography at a time perhaps where we had been quite scientific and quite mathematical, and it took it in a really different direction. It's very interesting actually to have a look at the kind of history of geography and how it's changed over time as a subject. Right, let's have a look at the second one. So, is this true or is this false? Place is space infused with meaning. Do you think this is true or do you think this is false? So, hopefully linking in with some of Yi-Fu Tuan's ideas. Yeah, I've got some coming through. Well done. I can see Sam and Joshua. You two are on fire tonight. So let's have a look. It is indeed true. And that links very nicely into my next question, because the next question is space is unfamiliar and unknown. Do you think this is true or do you think this is false? So again, pop in the chat box for this question. This is another kind of idea and concept that geographers look at, the difference between place and space. Right, I think I've got some coming through now. So let's have a look at the answer. It is indeed true. So that whole idea that space is really unknown, and it's as soon as we begin to attach meaning to it that it suddenly becomes familiar and it becomes a place. So he looks quite a lot at kind of different locations where that might be the case. And some sort of places where we go, we feel really quite disorientated because we're not familiar with them. But as soon as we experience them and begin to kind of note the landmarks and kind of key features and characteristics of the place, it's space, it becomes a place because we suddenly have attached meaning to it. Right, and our final question here. So this is the place meaning of somewhere you have not experienced is insignificant compared to meaning attached to places you have visited. So do you think this one is true or do you think this one is false? So let's see if you can pop something in there. Have a think about that one. Right, shall we have a little look? So this one is actually false, but I'm now going to bring Alice back in because we had a little bit of a debate about this, didn't we, Alice?
We certainly did. Yeah, absolutely.
Because actually, this kind of demonstrates why changing place is actually a really exciting topic, because you can argue different viewpoints. So, for example, do you want to give your example, Alice, when you were thinking of this answer?
Yeah, well, I was just thinking about places that perhaps either have a religious significance or perhaps it's your where your favorite film, TV series, perhaps a game you play is set, based, a novel. I just think in the digital age, we can't necessarily discount the meaning attached to places that people know about just via the media, really.
Yeah, whereas I very much came on it through the fact that I feel much more attached to places I physically have been to. So although, I enjoy virtual reality and obviously I enjoy watching films about different places, actually being in a place physically to me attaches me far more and creates more place meaning for me. So this is why it's quite an interesting kind of question, and also means that geography gives this amazing ability for us to create arguments and counter arguments, which of course is great for your AO2, for those 20-mark questions, to be able to look at sort of statements like this and argue it from 2 points of view. Right. On we go, and I think, we are. I'm staying here, aren't I, Alice, with this one? Right.
Yep, you are.
So
Absolutely.
it is still me. So we have looked at one of the questions there Alice was talking about with the seasoning such as, but these are endogenous factors. Now, this is an important part of the syllabus on understanding it, as these are aspects of the location's very local geography. Now, the term endo means internal. So these are factors that create unique and distinct qualities and features that define a very particular location or an area. So place character helps to distinguish one place from another. So for example, you can see there the local geology will impact maybe the stone used in local house building. I know certainly in my local area it has. Endogenous factors, and you can see on the little diagram there, include the location and the situation of a place, the topography of the land, so the relief and the gradient. You'll be looking at the type of geology, and that often links to the soil type. You could look at the demography, the population of the place, and also any of the land uses, so whether it's agricultural or industrial. And they often link to the economic characteristics, which form the basis of employment. Now, all of those factors really influence upon the built environment. So where buildings are located spatially within a settlement or place, what their purpose is, their design is, and how they might be used. Now, another really key word, which is often used by AQA and it's often in the textbooks and we kind of talk about it a lot, is the word character. But I thought it was really important for us to just stop a minute and think about, what does character mean? Because it pops up all through the changing place unit. And we need to be really sure that we understand it. So in the context of changing places, we're looking for the very special qualities or features of a place which distinguish it from another. So, for example, the quaint brick and flint cottages, which are characteristic of the Chilterns and arguably have very much contributed to its status as an area of outstanding natural beauty. Right, so using some of this knowledge then, what we're going to do next is have a look at an exam style question. And this is to do with those endogenous factors and how they contribute to the character of a place. So this figure here shows a hillside town Ronda in southern Spain, the outskirts of it. And this 6-mark question suggests how endogenous factors have contributed to the character of place. Would be AO1. There'll be 2 marks allocated for that. So that's knowledge and understanding of how the endogenous factors contribute to the character of a place. And then for more marks, actually 4 of the marks out of 6, you'd have to apply this knowledge and understanding to the novel situation, which is obviously the figure here. So the question is, suggest how they have contributed to the character of the place. So if we can just have a look at our exam gold, please, John. Thank you. So focus on 2 marks for the AO1. You need to clearly show your understanding of what is meant by endogenous factors. So you could use examples, so things like geology, location, situation, economic use, all of those things that we just looked at in that nice little diagram. The bulk or the lion's share of the marks, 2/3 of the marks, are allocated to this. So this is the strong bit, the bit that you really need to focus on. You have to apply that understanding to this new context. So for this question, you'd be identifying the very specific endogenous features you can see in the specific place and very, very clearly linking this explicitly to how they contributed to the character of the place. Okay, we just have a look at the next one so we can work through what we might do for this. Okay, so we can see here, it's a nice photo because it shows us quite a few different endogenous factors. So we can quite clearly see that it's a hillside. So we've got steep hillsides, a flatter valley floor. It seems to be going towards the flatter valley floor into which most of the buildings are clustered. Now we can also see the geology because there's exposed rock on some of the hillsides and a very thin soil layer is evident. And finally, when we have a look at the land use, we can note there's a real concentration of residential buildings. And right on the brow of the hill, you can see agricultural use. Now, probably knowing it's Spain, Mediterranean climate, it looks very likely that it might be olive trees. But this isn't all we need to do. We don't just notice what there is in the photograph, because the important thing is about explaining or suggesting how that contributes to the character. So in the next slide, here we can see how each one of those then creates character. So going back to our topography, we can infer that the crowding of the houses on the flatter land means that the community feels close. They're nestled together. You must have to be able to get on with your neighbours in this part of town. When we're considering the bare rock and exposed slopes, we can conclude that it creates significantly strong identity for the town. Those rocks can be seen from any part of town. It makes it really visually striking, creates really special qualities and features of the place that distinguishes it from perhaps other places nearby. It will potentially make the town really attractive to tourists and visitors, and it is indeed somewhere where people go. Finally, looking at the residential land of housing, so the residential land use of housing, it's really interesting that these are all the same colour and design. This gives the town a really harmonious aesthetic. Quite a nice phrase there, harmonious aesthetic. Basically, it makes it look pretty. It's not a hodgepodge of different buildings and colours. They all seem perfectly uniform. There's no kind of like jarring building there. They all look like they match. Everyone has stuck to the same design and colour, so it suggests a really strong sense of community. And we can infer that it's really strong community cohesion as everyone's agreeing to do exactly the same thing. Now, remember, these questions are more about the application of that AO2, applying your knowledge and understanding to this novel situation. I would suggest that you always bug the question. It's really easy to make mistakes, particularly when you're pressured for time and in a quite stressful exam situation, because and I've seen this plenty of times, students identify the endogenous factors, think that they've made an amazing response, and then they don't realise that actually the bit that they really need to pick up marks on is how it's impacted on the character, and that's been completely neglected in the answer. So don't be that student. Bug your questions, box the command word, underline the keywords, and glance over the question again so you really understand what it's asking you to ensure that you are going to deliver what's going to be on the mark scheme. Right, I think now I'm over to Alice.
Thank you, Suzanne. That was really useful in terms of developing our idea about how to write about character. Now, so on the one hand, we've got endogenous factors which help to shape the character of a place, but we also have exogenous factors, and we need to know about those as well. Now, what are they? So exo means from without, so something that's external, and this is about forces which originate from elsewhere. So this is necessarily looking at relationships with other places that contribute towards creating the character of a place. And they can significantly alter the socio-economic, demographic, or cultural characteristics of a place. For those of you that have studied global systems and global governance, what you will notice with these flows is they link up the two topics of changing places and global systems and global governance. So what we're thinking about is some of the influence of globalization and the relationships between local places and also different scales. So things that are taking place at a national scale, perhaps a regional scale across perhaps Europe, and then at a global scale, perhaps the influence of the United Nations, or on the other hand, the influence of a global TNC. So this is what exogenous factors are all about. But let's have a look at a good example that's quite contemporary. So Battersea Power Station in Wandsworth, so it's on the banks of the River Thames in London, was reopened in 2022. And this is what was written about it by the developers. We are creating a vibrant new riverside neighbourhood for London where people live, work and play. And this is an example of foreign direct investment in London. So 3 large players, Malaysian investors, have transformed this locality. So I'm thinking about not just the power station, but all this area of apartments around it and some of the open space around it. And that transformation has taken place really quite recently. The power station itself shut down about 40 years ago and then reopened in 2022 with this amazing retail space. It has its own underground station, so kind of working with the local council, of course, and some of the sort of community leaders there. But serious foreign direct investment gone into this part of London, influencing the character of it and also influencing the population. So if we, fun fact, if we look at the affordable housing within this development, it's now 9% compared to 15%, which was part of the 2010 planning application for this redevelopment. And at the time, I understand government policy was striving for something like 50% affordable housing in new developments. So you can see how that will have radically changed who lives in this area, because the question is who can afford to live in this area. So that's exogenous factors. We talked about endogenous and exogenous factors that shape a place. And with your place studies, you need to consider what it is that has shaped your place, your local place, and your distant and contrasting place. So let's go on now and think about what's the difference between a place study and a case study. You'll notice that in your other topics, perhaps you're studying hazards, you've got lots of different case studies that you need to know about. These might be a specific earthquake or a place shaped by hazards, for example. And these case studies are help us focus in on a specific place or event, but they demonstrate or are used to illustrate a kind of wider geographical concept, which we can then kind of apply to different parts of the world. So this is a case study, and the example here is a different one that's given the case study that we all need about a tropical rainforest when we're thinking about the water and carbon cycles topic. So what's a place study if that's slightly different? For changing places on paper 2, you need to know about 2 place studies. And a place study is different because of its broader focus on us trying to understand this key concept in geography, which is place. We're going to use place studies to understand perhaps more holistically the idea, the concept of place. And each study is of merit in and of itself. So it doesn't have to have wider applicability in the geographical world. You can imagine you're studying your place and you're really digging into that. Other geographers around the country don't have to study it, but it's of merit to you because you're not only asking, well, what's changing in this place, but you're also asking, how do we know? Do we just have a single perspective? How do we find out contrasting perspectives on this? And which sources are most useful for us to understand the lived experience in a place, how a place is changing? So we're almost engaging more in the research process and being reflective and being critical of different sources than we would be with a normal case study. So that gives you a bit of an idea about the difference. You have 2 contrasting place studies to undertake. The first one is a locality or neighbourhood or small community. It can be urban or rural. Sorry, these apply to both of them in terms of the scale, but it has to be a local place, so local to where you live or where your school is. And the second place is a contrasting place. Now, contrasting and distant, however, distant doesn't have to be the other side of the world, but it does need to show significant difference. It does need to show significant difference. So perhaps contrast in terms of economic development, population density, cultural background, and or systems of political and economic organisation. So this is what the exam board says about our two different place studies. So they need to be significantly different, and they've suggested 4 different areas where they could differ. They don't require all of them, but it's making some suggestions about how these could be work as contrasting places. Okay, what scale is most appropriate? Now, AQA have historically said that it should be the sort of size of place you'd be able to walk round within a day's field trip. It might be somewhere with a population of 10 to 20,000 people, or perhaps smaller. And this does mean that large towns and cities are too big. So your place studies shouldn't focus on a city alone. We need to focus within, if you're looking at an urban area, a particular ward or area with that town and city. So some people go for a place, for their distant place that's in a different country. So they might pick an American city like Detroit, but they need to focus within that into an area of Detroit. So that might be an area, for example, the area of transition between downtown Detroit and Grosse Pointe Park, which is an area called Alta Road. It's quite interesting. Personally, with my classes, I've studied an area called Hamtramck, which is almost a city within a city. So it's a little area that's kind of administratively different within Detroit and has a really interesting link to the manufacturing past of the city. So there are different ways into this, and I understand it's difficult when you're studying a distant place. It's going to take you a while to understand the place before you can pick that locality, but do focus in. Okay,
Right.
Suzanne, do you want to talk about your 2 examples here?
Yeah.
So you've got 2
Well,
UK examples of place studies.
Absolutely. I thought it'd be quite interesting just to show you kind of the thought processes and how I might sort of think about laying out to make sure that I really have some contrasting place studies. And I would really encourage you to create a table of key features between your local and your distant place so you can see the comparative contrast between them, so you can be really clear. The 2 places place studies that I use in my class conform to all of the requirements that AQA have set out. So in terms of their population size, they've got different population densities that has been mentioned by AQA. And all of those things impact hugely on the built environment in my 2 different places. Obviously, Reigate, you can see there with a lower population density, we've got kind of low density residential accommodation, whereas with the much higher densities in Stratford, we've got lots and lots of tower blocks, very, very high density. So it's a really great kind of contrast. Equally, actually, our local place hasn't changed very much at all. It's not very dynamic. It definitely kind of exhibits that sort of similarities to, it's very easy to kind of spot photos of old photos that we find, and we know exactly where they are because it's barely changed at all. And that really contrasts with our distant place, which is Stratford, which is not ever so far away. We can visit it, we can go up there for the day, but it is so contrasting. It's been so dynamic in that area, and it really demonstrates kind of the ideas of change there. Equally, you can see I've just put there the endogenous factors for Reigate, very, very important. They dominate its character, whereas is that almost the absolute opposite in Stratford. They play a very, very limited role. And as Alice was talking about, those exogenous factors, they're far more important in Stratford. The amount of foreign direct investment, government input, the Olympic Development Agency, all of those things have made huge changes in the area, as has immigration and national migration into the area. So it's a really good good practice to kind of create a table very similar to this. You might want to then go through some of your other aspects, you know, the demography, whether you're looking at socioeconomic change and things like that, to see how many differences there are. And there might be a few similarities, which again is quite interesting. So maybe pop something like this together before your mocks or for summer exams, for instance. Right, now, I want to just talk to you a little bit about scale in the UK census. So it's really important, as AQA said, to have a suitable scale of study for your place, because studying a city of millions of people, there's going to be huge variations across that city. And areas within a massive city are going to contrast with each other. So it makes your study far too broad, as Alice mentioned. So if we're studying a place in the UK, we actually have a wealth of data, but we have to be aware that we can consider our place at a number of different scales. Now, the census data is published under different headings or different labels, and this graphic gives you an idea of the reducing size of the unit of the data available. You can start by having a look at the electoral ward data, which sit between your 10 to 20,000 people band, which is kind of where AQA have sort of suggested is the optimum size. But these wards can then be divided further down into middle layer super output areas. Now, they on average, and there are discrepancies, and some will be slightly more and some will be slightly less, but on average, there's about 7,500 people, and it'll contain around 4,000 households. We can then compare that MSOA with another part of our area, which might be a different MSOA, to see if there's any spatial patterns evident across our place. Now we can zoom in even further at a smaller scale. So we can choose a lower layer super output area, and that zooms in around 1,500 people living in around 650 houses. And if we go in even further, we can go down to just 125 households at the output area. This is all really, really good stuff to look at spatial variation. And remember, that's often a component on the mark scheme for AO1 in your 20 mark questions. Not all the data is going to be available, though, unfortunately, because as you can see at that output area, the very smallest scale at only 125 households, and it can be less than that, the data actually becomes more personal, and it can, in some locations, actually almost be attributed to a street or a group of houses. So therefore, ONS keeps some of the data confidential, and they don't publish it at this really smaller scale. So it's a really good idea to be aware of what, when you're using maybe the ONS site, of what actually those different layers are looking at and the kind of sizes of them. Right, if we just have a look at the next one then. Brilliant. Am I doing this one, Alice? I think I am. Just double checking.
Yeah, carry on if you'd like to. Yeah, that's fine.
So for both of your
You're on a
place
roll.
studies, for both of your place studies, you have to study people's lived experience. This is absolutely vital, both in the past and in the present. Now, the past, you're likely to acquire that from secondary data. And from the present, it's very, very likely that you're going to collect that as primary data. Because that's going to be a really easy way of kind of maybe in your NEA or actually making sure that you're using that skill through questionnaires, interviews. You then have a choice of focus for your place study, and you can go and choose to look at the changing demographic and cultural characteristics, or instead you can look at economic change and social inequality. Now, both of those choices must involve the use of quantitative and qualitative data. So there's likely to be a combination of that primary and secondary data, particularly probably of your local place. The primary data will be easy to collect. However, the exam board does emphasise the past and present, so you have to look at how the data has changed. Now, that gives you the ability to think about temporal scale, which is again something that's talked about in the 20 mark essays for AO1, looking at how things have changed over time. Continuity and change is also highlighted in the specification, so it's likely that your places are meant to contrast. One might have changed significantly, whilst the other may have more continuity. And as I said, that's one certainly where my local place that we study has really not changed very much at all. So these are kind of the decisions you can make. Now, I would argue, however, that very often when we're looking at demographic and cultural characteristics, sometimes we actually begin to start looking at economic change and social inequalities. So there are some overlaps on some of those, particularly as well if we're looking at past and present kind of lived experience. It's hard to look at one without it kind of referencing or impacting on the other. Right, I think I'm over to Alice now to look at lived experience.
Thanks, Suzanne. So yes, I just chatting away in the chat saying that I agree with you. I think it's hard to separate them out, but it might be that your teacher's got a view on what you've got more to write about, whether it's changing demographic and cultural characteristics or economic change and socio-economic inequalities. So it might be worth checking with them, double checking with them what they feel is the stronger area that you can write about depending on your two place studies. But just quickly to remind people, what do we mean by people's lived experience? We're thinking about people's literally their personal subjective experience of where they live and where they work, which is becoming more and more important when we think about there being kind of no single important perspective on a place, and actually we need to understand the perspectives of different groups of people, young and old perhaps, able-bodied and disabled, thinking about different ethnic groups. What are their experiences? What are the experiences of men and women in urban areas, and do policymakers need to think about that? So lived experience is increasingly something that we're interested in as geographers, but of course policymakers and local government are interested in when trying to understand, because they're trying to understand the impact of decisions they're making at a local scale and get a sense of the impact on people. So, for example, a place that experiences rapid change may result in residents having feelings of dislocation and alienation, at least temporarily. And that's worth considering. That might be something that you have found out about as you interviewed local people about a change that perhaps has taken place in the last few years that you've been studying. So just as important to focus on some of this qualitative stuff as it is the quantitative stuff. And equally, in an exam, if you're presented with a qualitative resource, perhaps it's a little mini transcript from an interview where someone's giving an opinion, you need to be sure to talk about the strengths of that source, as well as perhaps the weaknesses in terms of its subjectivity or its how specific it is. So just something to remember in terms of exam technique.
Right. I think this is just, I thought I'd pop in case people want to make sure that their place studies are really slap bang up to date, because we had the census data that kind of dribbled through a little bit towards the end of last year. So if you're in year 13, it could be if you started with changing places, you were still working off 2011 census data, and this came out slightly later, and it was kind of released in different waves. So you can see there, you can go on and have a look at the demographic and cultural characteristics through the census data. It also summarises change over time. So you can actually click onto your place, you can put your postcode in, and it will actually kind of bring up some comparisons. So you can see how things have changed. It kind of gives you an overview. Now, I also really like that website there, streetcheck.co.uk, which again gives you kind of a resident profile. So it draws on a variety of different data that's out there and creates it for a postcode that you can pop in. Population pyramids. This is a fab website which I discovered through Twitter about a couple of months ago, and it's got 2018 data on it. So it's relatively up to date, but it can actually really be useful comparing the different kind of population structures in terms of particularly age range, which could be quite contrasting between your local and your distant place. And there's going to be a screenshot in a minute showing you what it does. On the ONS data, and also you may find some of your local councils have condensed some of this information from the ONS. They may have some of the data themselves, but you can also filter down and look at ethnicity. You can look at languages spoken. You can see what religions people have recorded on the census. But also you can do Google searches. And again, some places have far more than others, but you can look for oral histories. You can maybe look for artistic sources of paintings, photos, old postcards, all sorts of different things are out there. Sometimes it just takes quite a bit of Googling. And then there might be events and celebrations which might indicate something about the different cultures, religions that are kind of represented in the area that you're looking at. So you can take maybe a screenshot of that if you haven't seen some of those websites before. They're all very accessible and very, very easy to use. Right, if we just have a look at the next slide. If you're, sorry, that last little box there, if your place is in another country, obviously the ONS isn't going to be suitable for that place, but it's very likely that the government sites or local authority sites may have some very, very similar data to that which the UK government collects. Right, so this screenshot then is this wonderful website, parallel.co.uk, and all you have to do is you kind of put in your postcode and then you hover over, and this is on the lower super output area, so that's around 1,500 people. And I think this one here you can see is a screenshot. It just shows you we've got a really odd population pyramid. Quite clearly, we've got a lot of in-migration in the working age. So this is kind of inner city. This is Stratford in Newham. So we're looking at lots of people moving into the area, likely a lot of gentrification with all the new redevelopments in the area. So these kind of population pyramids can be very interesting and tell us an awful lot about that place. Right. So this is also what you can create on ONS. So this is having a look at national migrants, so linked into that population pyramid there of people who lived somewhere else in the, I think, had a different address 1 year ago. And what I find fascinating with this, for example, is that we see such a high amount of churn, population churn. It's a very dynamic area. People moving in kind of really short spaces of time might be difficult perhaps to have like community cohesion, because your next door neighbour is perhaps changing every year. Probably a lot of rental accommodation in some of those new developments. So that's another place to perhaps go and have a little look for any of you who've got a UK-based place. Right, when we're thinking about economic change and social inequalities, now we can use lots of the same ONS census data. We just change some of the variables that we kind of feed into it to ask it to create different maps for us, or different sort of data points. So we can look at employment, and then we can also look at education of a local population. You can look at kind of what qualifications people have got in the area. And just as we talked about with the population, we can get those summary over time changes. So looking at different scales. So from that middle super output area down to that neighbourhood scale of the lower super output area level. We can look at employment structure, so how many people work in primary industries and secondary industries, tertiary, quaternary. We can look at professionals, skilled, semi-skilled, things like that. The index of multiple deprivation is also quite an important measurement for those of you studying economic change and looking at social inequalities. Now, that kind of is a composite indicator which uses 7 indicators. All of them have slightly different weighting, and it kind of creates a number, or an ability to see where places sit in relation to others. They're often in different deciles, so it's kind of top 10%, then 10 to 20%, and so on. And we have data for 2015, and we have updated data for 2019. So we can actually see whether places are moving up or down that index. There is some caveats there. I'm not going to go into it too much tonight, but you have to be careful because a place doesn't necessarily change. It just might be that other places change in relative to them. Similarly, oral histories and interviews and old photographs and paintings and all of those things that we looked at for the population are great stuff. And government and council reports. So there is some, I know I've looked at stuff around Stratford, looking at a gentrification index, which kind of assesses how much gentrification has gone on. There's the Gini coefficient, which gives a number between 0 and 1, how unequal the place is. We can look at life expectancy, which is obviously linked to kind of social inequalities. We might look at access to health services. Food deserts, I think, is a really interesting one because that kind of looks at accessibility to sort of supermarkets and newsagents and things like that. And there are kind of areas that just don't have access. And we can also look at crime rates. Right, if we just over to the next one. I think we're going to finish off now with a nice game, and I'm over back to Alice.
Thanks, Suzanne. Brilliant. What an excellent review of the different focuses that your place studies could take, and some great resources there to tap into. Love population parallel, producing those population pyramids of a small scale. Right, just to finish off, and I need to see your contributions in the chat. Let's look out for the red herring. Let's think about the odd one out and see who's been listening today. So let's have our first question, John. Which of the 4 items is the odd one out and why? So the 4 we've got are A, interviews, B, oral histories, C, census data, and D, poetry. So looking at that list and thinking about these place studies we've been talking about tonight, which of the 4 items is the odd one out and why? Can you put a letter in the chat and possibly a reason why it's the odd one out? I can see some people have been contributing tons tonight, so thank you very much for that. And if you're playing on catch up, don't forget to take part as well. Okay, John, let's have a look at what the answer is for this one. So census data is the odd one out because the other 3 are all qualitative sources of data, whereas census data provides us with quantitative data, and it's more of a formal data source in terms of depicting place and population, where the others are subjective but equally have their value and providing us with a rich seam of information about lived experience. So question 2, which of the 4 items is the odd one out and why? A, culture, B, demography, C, foreign direct investment, and D, language. Which one of those jumps out as being quite different, about something different we've been talking about tonight? I think this one is a little bit of an easier one, John, so better provide us with the answer, please. Yep. So foreign direct investment perhaps jumps out as a specifically different thing. All of the others are things that are impacted by shifting flows of people, whereas foreign direct investment itself is an indication of flows of money. But these different flows are exogenous factors that we need to be aware of that might be shaping your local or distant place. Question 3 then. Which of these ones is the odd one out? So we got A, in-migration, B, conservation, C, population decline, and D, economic growth. Which one of those looks different if we think about our places and how they are changing? I think the answer must be B, conservation. So conservation is about continuity. And of course, not everything changes in a place overnight. Suzanne, I've still been chuckling to myself about you talking about how the lack of dynamism in Reigate, and wondering if people of Reigate are going to forgive you on that. But yeah, absolutely. Things don't always change all of the time. And the built environment is a really good example of elements of a place that are retained and conserved. And that's an active process in itself.
Can I just say, Reigate is beautiful. I just want to say there's a reason why it's not very dynamic. It is because it is so lovely and it's been conserved to stay looking really attractive.
Okay, so it's about conservation. Okay, just pulling your leg. Right, question 4. Which of these is the odd one out? A, UN Sustainable Development Goals. B, transnational corporations. C, local community groups. Or D, government policy. If I give you a hint, we are thinking about factors or forces shaping a place, and that means that, of course, the odd one out is C, local community groups. The other 3 are exogenous forces, so they're external agencies operating at different scales to shape a place. Question 5 then, please. So which of these is the odd one out? We've got local art exhibitions, advertising copy, tourist agency material, and cartography. Now, cartography, that means maps. Tourist agency material, so the sort of blurb that you get about why you should visit a place. Local art, that's straightforward. And that advertising copy, that's a little bit of a sort of key term, isn't it, for the spec? And it really just means what's written in an advert. Perhaps an advert in the newspaper, something you see on the internet, or maybe it's read out on the radio. It really just means the words that are within an advert. So which one of those is the odd one out? And it is, congrats to those people at home who've got this, official cartography. So if we think about OS maps are formal representations of a place, whereas all of the others are informal and subjective representations.
Thanks ever so much, Alice and Suzanne. Alice, we have other places for students to get some support as well on some of these topics. Would I be right there?
Yes, absolutely. Yep. So there are other live streams that we've done on this topic. So Suzanne and I have worked on one about place, meaning and representation, which is available both on YouTube and the Tutor2U website. And there are a couple of sort of fast and furious revision blasts running through all of the key terms, which would perhaps be super useful pre the mocks.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Listen, what a wonderful live stream we've had tonight. Thank you so much to everybody who's contributed in the chat window. Apologies for the little bit of a delay, which meant that we couldn't always read them out at the same time. Thank you, of course, to Suzanne and Alice for delivering that. Lots and lots of really great pieces of information there. Just a quick reminder, the PowerPoint that Suzanne and Alice have been using tonight will be available in about 15 seconds time when I press the finish button. So you'll be able to look at that and have a look through some of that information again. Some of those links I think you'll find are live, and you can use them directly from the PowerPoint file itself. And of course, we've recorded this video as well tonight, so you can always look over it again as well. Brilliant stuff. Wonderful. We're back again next week. Alice, am I right again?
We are, absolutely. We're switching to Wednesday. So we've got 2 Wednesdays coming up next week and the week after. So that's the 15th and the 22nd. And we're focused in on a optional topic that we haven't addressed before, which is called resource security. So for those people who do resource security on paper 2, we're thinking of you.
Indeed we are. Now, if you found tonight useful, please do give us a thumbs up in YouTube. That helps us get our message out there to as many people as possible. Without any further ado, we look forward to seeing you again at a later date. Goodbye, everybody.
Thanks. Bye.